In the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan, where every shadow could hide death and every sound might be your last, there lived a soldier who couldn't hit the broadside of a barn during training. Her fellow soldiers whispered behind her back, calling her Miss Target, with cruel laughter echoing through the barracks. The drill sergeants shook their heads in frustration as she fumbled with equipment that seemed second nature to everyone else. But sometimes, the greatest warriors are forged not in the comfort of success, but in the burning crucible of repeated failure. Sometimes, the very person everyone counts out becomes the one who holds the line when hell breaks loose. This is the story of Elena Rodriguez, a young woman from rural Texas who stumbled through basic training like she was walking through quicksand, only to become the deadliest sniper her unit had ever seen, and the guardian angel who brought them all home alive. What happens when the weakest link in the chain becomes the strongest? What transforms a struggling recruit into a legend whispered about in military circles years later? This is that story. Raw, real, and absolutely true. Elena Rodriguez never imagined that her life would be defined by the sound of gunfire. But growing up in the dusty town of Marfa, Texas, she was no stranger to hardship. Her father had left when she was 8, leaving her mother to raise 3 children on a waitress salary that barely covered rent. Elena learned early that life didn't hand out participation trophies. You either fought for what you wanted or you went without. At 18, with college fees mounting like storm clouds and no clear path forward, Elena made a decision that shocked her family and friends. She walked into the Army recruitment office on a sweltering Tuesday morning in July 2018, her worn sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. The recruiter, Staff Sergeant Martinez, looked up from his paperwork with the practiced eye of someone who had seen thousands of young people walk through those doors. "I want to serve my country," Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt. But there was more to it than patriotism. She needed structure, purpose, and honestly, she needed the steady paycheck and educational benefits that military service promised. Her mother had worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table, and Elena was determined to build something better. Basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia, hit Elena like a freight train traveling at full speed. The Georgia heat was suffocating, pressing down on the recruits like a heavy blanket soaked in sweat and misery. From the first morning when Drill Sergeant Thompson's voice cracked like thunder at 5 in the morning, Elena knew she was in trouble. Everything that came naturally to her fellow recruits seemed impossible for Elena. During physical training, while others powered through push-ups with mechanical precision, Elena struggled to complete even half the required number. Her arms would shake, her form would crumble, and she would collapse onto the red Georgia dirt while drill sergeants circled her like vultures. "Rodriguez, what are you doing down there? Taking a nap?" Drill Sergeant Thompson would bellow, his voice carrying across the entire training field. The other recruits would try not to smile, but Elena could see the amusement in their eyes. She was becoming the unit's comic relief, the person everyone could feel better about themselves by comparison. The weapons training was even worse. The M16 rifle that seemed like a natural extension of other soldiers' bodies felt foreign and unwieldy in Elena's hands. During marksmanship drills, while her battle buddies consistently hit targets at 300 yards, Elena's shots scattered across the range like confetti in a windstorm. She missed targets that were so close she could have thrown rocks and had better accuracy. "Rodriguez, are you aiming at the target or trying to shoot the moon?" Drill Sergeant Johnson asked during one particularly embarrassing session. Elena's cheeks burned with shame as snickers rippled through the group of soldiers lying prone beside her on the firing line. She had fired 30 rounds and managed to hit the target exactly 0 times. 0. Even blind luck should have given her at least 1 hit. But somehow she had managed to miss completely. The worst part wasn't the drill sergeant's criticism. They were hard on everyone. The worst part was the growing certainty among her fellow recruits that Elena simply didn't belong. During evening downtime, she would overhear conversations that stopped abruptly when she approached. She caught fragments of sentences. "Dead weight, going to get someone killed, shouldn't have made it past week 1. Private Jackson, a cocky kid from Alabama who seemed to excel at everything military, was particularly cruel. "Hey, Miss Target," he would call out when Elena walked by. "Maybe you should transfer to the kitchen. At least there you can't shoot anyone by accident." His friends would laugh, and Elena would pretend not to hear while her stomach twisted into knots. But Elena had inherited her mother's stubbornness along with her dark hair and quiet determination. Every morning when her body screamed in protest and her mind whispered that she should quit, she remembered her mother's hands, cracked and worn from years of hard work. She remembered the nights her mother came home so exhausted she could barely speak, but still found energy to help with homework and pack lunches for the next day. "I didn't raise a quitter," her mother had said during their last phone call before Elena left for basic training. Those words became Elena's anchor in the storm of military training, so Elena adapted. If she couldn't match her fellow recruits in raw ability, she would outwork them. While others slept, she practiced. She would sneak out to the training areas during personal time, using flashlights to practice weapon disassembly and reassembly until her fingers could find every part in complete darkness. She studied training manuals until her eyes burned, memorizing procedures and protocols that others learned through intuition. The physical training gradually became less torturous. Elena's body, forged by years of physical labor helping her mother with odd jobs around Marfa, slowly adapted to the demands of military fitness. She would never be the fastest runner or strongest soldier, but she developed a grinding endurance that impressed even the drill sergeants. However, the marksmanship remained a disaster. Week after week, Elena's scores remained at the bottom of every shooting exercise. During one particularly frustrating session, she fired an entire magazine without hitting anything larger than the broadside of a barn door. Drill Sergeant Thompson pulled her aside after the exercise, his usually harsh expression softened with something that might have been concern. "Rodriguez, I'm going to be straight with you," he said, his voice lower than usual. "Your heart's in the right place, and you work harder than half these other knuckleheads. But if you can't qualify with your weapon, you can't graduate. And if you can't graduate..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Elena knew that washing out of basic training meant returning home with nothing but shame and a pile of debt. That night, Elena lay in her narrow bunk and stared at the ceiling. Around her, 30 other recruits slept the deep, exhausted sleep of people pushed to their physical limits. But Elena's mind raced with doubts and fears. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe she didn't belong here. Maybe she was just setting herself up for an even bigger failure. The next morning brought another weapons training session, and Elena's performance was worse than ever. She missed targets that were practically touching her rifle barrel. Other recruits began to openly question whether she would even be allowed to continue training. The whispers became bolder, and Elena felt the weight of 30 pairs of eyes watching her fail again and again. But something strange happened during the final week of marksmanship training. Elena had been assigned to work with a different instructor, Sergeant Martinez, an older man with kind eyes and infinite patience. Instead of shouting criticism from behind the firing line, he knelt beside Elena and watched her technique carefully. "You're overthinking this, Rodriguez," he said quietly. "I can see your mind working, calculating angles and wind speed like you're launching a rocket to Mars. Sometimes you need to trust your instincts instead of fighting them." He had Elena close her eyes and dry fire her weapon repeatedly, focusing on the feel of the trigger pull, rather than hitting a specific target. For the first time since arriving at Fort Benning, Elena felt something click. Not her scores, those remained terrible, but something deeper. A sense that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't completely hopeless. Elena graduated from basic training by the skin of her teeth, with marksmanship scores that barely met the minimum requirements. Her family came to the graduation ceremony, her mother wearing the only dress she owned and beaming with pride that seemed to light up the entire ceremony. Grand Elena felt a mixture of relief and uncertainty as she received her uniform and military occupational specialty assignment. She had been assigned to an infantry support unit, a relatively safe position that would keep her away from frontline combat. Elena was simultaneously relieved and disappointed. Part of her had hoped to prove herself in a more challenging role, but her training scores made it clear that the Army had other plans for her. Advanced individual training brought new challenges and new failures. Elena continued to struggle with weapons proficiency, though she had improved enough to meet basic requirements. Her fellow soldiers still saw her as the weak link, the person most likely to crack under pressure. Elena accepted their assessment because, honestly, she wasn't sure they were wrong. But the Army had other plans for Elena Rodriguez. In late 2019, her unit received deployment orders to Afghanistan, where American forces were still engaged in combat operations against Taliban insurgents. Elena would finally have the chance to prove herself, or to confirm everyone's worst expectations about her abilities. The news of deployment hit Elena like a physical blow. All the training in the world couldn't have prepared her for the reality that she would soon be carrying a rifle in a war zone where people would be shooting back. Her hands shook as she called her mother with the news, trying to sound confident and prepared when she felt anything but ready. "Mija, you are stronger than you know," her mother said, her voice thick with emotion. "You have always found a way to succeed when it mattered most. This will be no different." Elena wanted to believe those words, but as she packed her gear for deployment, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to discover just how unprepared she really was. The mountains of Afghanistan would test every soldier in ways that basic training could never simulate. And Elena Rodriguez, the recruit who had failed every drill and barely scraped through training, was about to face the ultimate test of her life. The transport plane carrying Elena and her unit to Afghanistan flew through turbulence that made her stomach churn with more than just motion sickness. Looking around at her fellow soldiers, Elena saw a mixture of excitement, fear, and grim determination on their faces. Private Jackson, who had tormented her throughout training, sat across the aisle cleaning his rifle with obsessive precision. Even he looked nervous, though he would never admit it. Elena's unit was assigned to Forward Operating Base Shank in Logar Province, a strategic outpost situated in a valley surrounded by towering mountains that seemed to scrape the sky. The landscape was both beautiful and terrifying. Ancient peaks covered in snow even in summer, while the valleys below baked under a relentless sun that turned everything the color of old bones. The base itself was a collection of concrete barriers, prefabricated buildings, and constant activity. Helicopters thundered overhead at all hours, bringing supplies and evacuating wounded soldiers. The sound of distant gunfire was as common as birdsong, a constant reminder that they were in an active war zone, where death could come from any direction, without warning. Elena's first few weeks at the base were a continuation of her training struggles, but with life and death consequences. During patrol exercises, she remained the soldier most likely to trip over her own equipment, get separated from the group, or fumble with her gear at critical moments. Her squad leader, Staff Sergeant Williams, was a career soldier from Detroit who had seen 3 previous deployments and had little patience for incompetence. "Rodriguez, you need to get your act together," Williams told her after a particularly disastrous training patrol, where Elena had somehow managed to get lost between the mess hall and the armory. "This isn't basic training anymore. Out there." He gestured toward the mountains beyond the base perimeter. "Your mistakes don't just get you push-ups. They get people killed." The weight of his words settled on Elena like a heavy blanket. She understood the stakes intellectually, but the reality of combat still felt abstract and distant. That changed dramatically on a humid Tuesday morning in March 2020, when Elena's unit received orders for their first real patrol mission. The mission seemed straightforward. Escort a convoy of supply trucks through a mountain pass to a smaller outpost about 20 miles away. Intelligence reports suggested minimal enemy activity in the area, and the patrol was classified as routine. Elena felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. She wanted to prove herself, but she also knew that routine meant less chance of exposing her weaknesses under fire. The convoy consisted of 3 armored Humvees and 2 supply trucks, with Elena's 12-person squad spread between the vehicles. Elena was assigned to the middle Humvee as the designated radio operator, a position that kept her relatively protected while still making her crucial to the mission's success. As they rolled through the base gates and into the Afghan countryside, Elena felt her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and terror. The landscape outside the convoy was stark and beautiful. Ancient villages clung to mountainsides like barnacles on a ship's hull, their mud brick buildings blending seamlessly with the rocky terrain. Farmers worked small terraced fields that had been carved into the hillsides centuries ago, their methods unchanged by decades of war. Children occasionally waved from roadside compounds, their faces curious about the heavily armed Americans passing through their world. For the first 2 hours, the patrol proceeded exactly as planned. The convoy maintained steady progress through winding mountain roads, and Elena began to relax slightly. Maybe this deployment wouldn't be the nightmare she had imagined. Maybe she could serve her time quietly, do her job adequately, and return home without ever proving or disproving her worth as a soldier. That illusion shattered at exactly 11:47 a.m. when the lead Humvee hit an improvised explosive device buried in the road. The explosion was unlike anything Elena had experienced during training. The sound wasn't just loud, it was a physical force that seemed to reach inside her chest and squeeze her heart. The ground shook violently, and Elena watched in horror as the lead vehicle disappeared in a cloud of black smoke and flying debris. For a moment that felt like hours, everything was silent, except for the ringing in Elena's ears. Then the gunfire started. Taliban fighters had positioned themselves in the rocks above the road, turning the convoy's route into a deadly ambush. Automatic weapons fire rained down from multiple directions, bullets sparking off armor plating and shattering windows. Elena's training kicked in partially. She grabbed her radio and began trying to call for backup, but her hands were shaking so violently she could barely press the correct buttons. "Contact! Contact!" Staff Sergeant Williams shouted over the chaos. "IED plus small arms fire. We need immediate support." Elena could hear the fear in his voice despite his experience, and that terrified her more than the bullets singing through the air around them. The convoy's return fire was fierce but uncoordinated. Soldiers were shooting at muzzle flashes among the rocks, but the enemy fighters were well concealed and difficult to target. Elena crouched behind her vehicle's armor plating and tried to spot enemy positions, but all she could see were puffs of smoke and the occasional glint of metal among the boulders. The lead Humvee was completely destroyed, its crew either dead or severely wounded. Elena could see one soldier crawling away from the burning wreckage, leaving a trail of blood on the dusty road. Private Martinez from her basic training company was trying to reach the wounded man, but enemy fire was too intense for anyone to move in the open. Elena's radio crackled with urgent messages from base command, but the words seemed to blur together in her panic. She was supposed to coordinate the evacuation and provide updates on the tactical situation, but she felt paralyzed by the chaos surrounding her. This was exactly what everyone had predicted. When the pressure was highest, Elena Rodriguez would fold like a house of cards. But something unexpected happened as Elena crouched behind her vehicle, listening to the sounds of her fellow soldiers in desperate combat. Instead of panic overwhelming her completely, she began to notice details with startling clarity. The enemy gunfire was coming from 3 distinct positions in the rocks above them. The fighters were good, but they had made their positions slightly too obvious by firing repeatedly from the same locations. Elena had always been a careful observer, even when she couldn't translate those observations into action. Growing up in rural Texas, she had spent countless hours hunting with her grandfather before he died, learning to spot movement in dense brush and identify animal trails by the smallest signs. Those skills, dormant throughout her military training, suddenly became relevant in ways she had never imagined. "Sergeant Williams," Elena called out during a brief lull in the firing. "I can see their positions. 3 groups in the rocks at 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock, and 2 o'clock from our position." Williams looked at her with surprise. In all their training exercises, Elena had never displayed this kind of tactical awareness. "Can you mark them for the others?" he asked, hope creeping into his voice. Elena grabbed her rifle and tried to point out the enemy positions to her fellow soldiers, but her marksmanship skills remained as poor as ever. She fired several shots toward the rocks, but they went wide by yards, accomplishing nothing except wasting ammunition. Her moment of clarity was being undermined by the same fundamental weakness that had plagued her throughout training. The ambush dragged on for nearly an hour, with both sides exchanging sporadic gunfire, but neither gaining a decisive advantage. Elena continued to provide tactical observations, but without the ability to engage enemy targets effectively, her contributions felt limited. She watched her fellow soldiers demonstrate the skills they had mastered in training: accurate shooting, coordinated movement, effective use of cover, while she remained crouched behind her vehicle like a spectator at her own war. Relief finally came in the form of attack helicopters that arrived to provide close air support. The Apache helicopters made several passes over the ambush site, their chain guns and rockets turning the enemy positions into smoking craters. The Taliban fighters who survived the air assault melted away into the mountains, leaving the convoy to tend their wounded and assess the damage. The aftermath of the ambush was Elena's first real introduction to the cost of combat. 2 soldiers had been killed in the lead vehicle, and 3 others were seriously wounded. Elena helped load the casualties into evacuation helicopters, her hands steady now that the immediate danger had passed. The blood on her uniform was not her own, but it marked her initiation into the reality of war in a way that no training exercise ever could. Back at the base, Elena's unit was debriefed extensively about the ambush. Her tactical observations were noted and praised by the intelligence officers, but Elena felt hollow about the compliments. She had seen what needed to be done but couldn't execute it effectively. She remained the weak link in the chain, the soldier who could identify problems but not solve them. Over the following weeks, Elena's unit conducted several more patrols, and she gradually became more comfortable with the rhythm of combat operations. Her observational skills proved consistently valuable. She had an unusual talent for spotting potential ambush sites, identifying improvised explosive devices, and reading the subtle signs that indicated hostile activity in an area. But her inability to effectively engage targets remained a constant source of frustration. Private Jackson, who had somehow survived the ambush without a scratch, continued his pattern of cruel jokes at Elena's expense. "Hey, Miss Target," he said one evening after a patrol where Elena had again failed to hit anything during a brief firefight. "Maybe you should just carry binoculars instead of a rifle. At least then we'd know what your job actually is." Elena's squad mates laughed, but the laughter had less cruelty than before. They were beginning to appreciate Elena's unique contributions even if she couldn't shoot straight. Staff Sergeant Williams had started asking for Elena's assessment of potential patrol routes, and other soldiers had begun to trust her judgment about tactical situations. But Elena's reputation as a poor marksman continued to define her in the eyes of most soldiers on the base. During training exercises, she remained consistently at the bottom of marksmanship scores. During actual combat, she fired her weapon rarely and ineffectively, contributing to firefights mainly through target spotting and radio coordination. The transformation that would define Elena's military career began almost accidentally during a routine training session in May 2020. The base's sniper team was conducting long-range shooting practice, and Elena had volunteered to help set up targets at various distances. As she walked back from placing targets at 800 yards, she passed the firing line where Sergeant First Class Peterson, the unit's senior sniper, was coaching other soldiers in precision shooting techniques. "Rodriguez!" Peterson called out. "Come over here and give this a try." Elena hesitated. Her poor marksmanship was legendary throughout the base, and she had no desire to embarrass herself in front of the sniper team. "I don't think that's a good idea, Sergeant. I can barely hit targets at 100 yards. Peterson, a quiet man from Montana who rarely spoke unless he had something important to say, studied Elena with interest. "That's with a regular rifle and iron sights. This is different. Trust me." Reluctantly, Elena approached the firing line where Peterson had set up a precision rifle equipped with a high-powered scope. The weapon was heavier than her standard M16, with a longer barrel and adjustments that seemed infinitely complex. Elena had never even touched a sniper rifle before, let alone attempted to fire one. Peterson spent 20 minutes explaining the basics of long-range shooting, breath control, trigger discipline, scope adjustments, and reading environmental conditions. Elena listened carefully, but she remained skeptical about her ability to apply any of these techniques successfully. Her track record spoke for itself. "Now, I want you to take a shot at that target at 400 yards, Peterson said, pointing to a standard silhouette target that looked impossibly small and distant. "Don't think about it too much. Just apply what I've taught you and trust the equipment." Elena settled into a prone firing position, the rifle feeling strange but somehow comfortable against her shoulder. She peered through the scope, and for the first time since joining the army, a target looked clear and reachable. The crosshairs seemed to settle naturally on the target's center mass, and Elena found herself controlling her breathing in a way that felt instinctive rather than forced. She squeezed the trigger gently, following Peterson's instructions about consistent pressure and follow-through. The rifle recoiled against her shoulder, and Elena kept her eye on the scope to observe the bullet's impact. The shot hit dead center. Elena stared at the target through the scope, unable to believe what she was seeing. After months of missing targets at close range, she had just placed a perfect shot at 400 yards on her first attempt with a sniper rifle. She looked up at Peterson, who was studying the target through his own spotting scope with an expression of mild surprise. "Good shot, Rodriguez," Peterson said, his voice neutral but his eyes showing interest. "Let's try it again."
Elena's second shot hit slightly left of center, but still within the target's scoring rings.
Her third shot was another bullseye. By the time Peterson called an end to the impromptu training session, Elena had fired 10 rounds and scored 8 hits at 400 yards, a performance that would have been respectable for an experienced marksman, let alone someone with Elena's reputation. Word of Elena's unexpected shooting performance spread quickly through the base. Some soldiers dismissed it as beginner's luck or a fluke, but Peterson was intrigued enough to invite Elena to additional training sessions. Over the following weeks, Elena discovered that she had a natural talent for precision shooting that had been completely masked by her struggles with standard infantry weapons and techniques. The difference, Peterson explained, was partly technical and partly psychological. Sniper rifles were designed for precision rather than rapid fire, requiring patience and careful technique rather than the aggressive, fast-paced approach emphasized in basic infantry training. Elena's careful, methodical personality, which had been a liability during dynamic combat drills, became a tremendous asset when applied to long-range precision shooting. More importantly, Elena discovered that she could see and interpret details at long distances that other soldiers missed entirely. Her years of hunting in Texas had trained her to spot subtle movements and identify targets partially concealed by vegetation or terrain features. Combined with her natural patience and steady hands, these skills made her potentially exceptional at long-range engagement. Elena began spending her off-duty time training with the sniper team, learning advanced techniques for reading wind conditions, calculating range estimates, and engaging targets at distances that had seemed impossible just weeks earlier. Her standard infantry performance remained mediocre, but her precision shooting skills improved with startling speed. Staff Sergeant Williams initially viewed Elena's new interest with skepticism. Rodriguez, I need you focused on your actual job, not playing around with specialized equipment, he told her after learning about her sniper training. We already have designated marksmen. What we need from you is basic infantry competence. But Peterson advocated for Elena's continued training with surprising intensity. This soldier has genuine talent, he told Williams during a conversation Elena accidentally overheard. I've been training snipers for 12 years, and I've rarely seen someone develop this quickly. She could be genuinely exceptional if given the proper opportunity. Elena's confidence began to grow for the first time since joining the military. She had finally found something she could do well, something that made use of her unique combination of skills and temperament. Her fellow soldiers remained skeptical. After all, Elena Rodriguez was still the same person who had struggled through basic training and failed most combat drills. But Elena knew something had fundamentally changed in her relationship with warfare. The test of that change would come sooner than anyone expected. In late June 2020, Elena's unit received intelligence about a planned Taliban attack on their forward operating base. The attack would come from the surrounding mountains, and it would require every soldier to perform at their absolute best if they hoped to survive. Elena Rodriguez, the failed recruit who had struggled through every aspect of military training, was about to discover whether her newfound abilities could translate into real combat effectiveness. When the stakes were highest, the intelligence report that arrived on June 28, 2020, changed everything for Elena and her unit. Taliban forces had been observed massing in the mountains surrounding forward operating base Schenk, with intercepts suggesting a coordinated attack planned for the following evening. Unlike the random ambushes and hit-and-run tactics that had characterized most enemy activity in the region, this would be a full-scale assault designed to overrun the base entirely. Colonel Martinez, the base commander, called an emergency briefing for all personnel. The main briefing room was packed with soldiers who had grown accustomed to routine patrols and occasional skirmishes, but nothing approaching the scale of what intelligence was predicting. Elena sat in the back row, still feeling like an outsider despite her months of deployment. "Gentlemen and ladies," Colonel Martinez began, his voice carrying the weight of 25 years of military experience, "we're looking at a coordinated attack involving an estimated 60 to 80 Taliban fighters. They'll be coming from multiple directions using the high ground to their advantage. This is not a probe or a harassment attack. They intend to take this base." The room buzzed with nervous energy as soldiers absorbed the implications. Elena felt her stomach drop as she realized this would be unlike any combat she had experienced. The ambush in March had involved perhaps a dozen enemy fighters. This attack would dwarf anything their unit had faced during deployment. Colonel Martinez continued his briefing, outlining defensive positions, coordination procedures, and evacuation plans for wounded personnel. Each squad would be assigned specific sectors to defend, with overlapping fields of fire, designed to catch attackers in devastating crossfire. Elena's squad was assigned to defend the eastern approach, where the terrain offered the most cover for attacking forces. "One more thing," Colonel Martinez added, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "Air support will be limited, weather conditions are deteriorating, and the nearest Apache units are committed to operations elsewhere. For the first few hours, we'll be largely on our own. Every soldier needs to perform at their absolute best." Eleanor felt her mouth go dry. Limited air support meant no safety net, no overwhelming firepower to compensate for tactical mistakes or individual failures. Every soldier would need to contribute meaningfully to the base's defense, including Elena Rodriguez, who had spent her entire military career as the weak link in every chain. Staff Sergeant Williams gathered his squad after the briefing, his expression grim but determined. "Okay, people, you heard the man. This is the real deal. I want everyone to check and double-check their equipment. Make sure you have plenty of ammunition, water, and first aid supplies. We might be in for a long night." Elena's squad spent the afternoon preparing defensive positions and reviewing fields of fire. The eastern approach to the base was a series of rocky ridges and steep gullies that offered plenty of concealment for attacking forces. Elena studied the terrain through binoculars, identifying potential sniper positions and routes that enemy forces might use to approach their perimeter. As she observed the distant mountainsides, Elena felt a strange sense of clarity that she had never experienced before facing combat. Instead of the paralyzing fear that had gripped her during the March ambush, she felt focused and alert. The training with Peterson had given her confidence in her abilities, but more importantly, it had taught her to see the battlefield differently. "Rodriguez," Staff Sergeant Williams called out, interrupting her observations. "I want you positioned here." He pointed to a sandbag position about 50 yards behind the main defensive line. You'll be our radio operator and backup for casualty evacuation. Williams was placing her in the safest, least important position available, essentially keeping her out of the main fight. She understood his reasoning. Elena's combat record didn't inspire confidence in high-stakes situations. But she also knew that her months of sniper training had transformed her capabilities in ways that Williams didn't fully understand. "Sergeant," Elena said carefully, "I think I could be more useful in a different position. Maybe somewhere with longer sight lines where I could provide overwatch for the squad." Williams looked at her with barely concealed skepticism. "Rodriguez, this isn't training. I need every soldier in a position where they can contribute effectively. Radio coordination is crucial, and it's a job I know you can handle." Elena wanted to argue, to explain how her skills had developed, to convince Williams that she could be trusted with a more challenging role. But military discipline and her own history of failure kept her silent. She nodded acceptance and began preparing her assigned position, though her eyes kept drifting to higher positions that would offer better fields of fire. Sergeant First Class Peterson found Elena as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the base perimeter. "Rodriguez, I heard about your assignment for tonight," he said.
His voice neutral, but his eyes showing concern.
"Yes, Sergeant. Radio operator and casualty evacuation support," Elena replied, unable to keep the disappointment out of her voice entirely. Peterson was quiet for a moment, studying Elena's position and the terrain beyond. "You know," he said finally, "radio operators need to maintain situational awareness. That means observing the battlefield and reporting what they see. A good radio operator with a precision rifle and proper training could provide valuable intelligence on enemy movements." Elena looked at Peterson with surprise. "Are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Peterson replied with the hint of a smile. "I'm stating that a radio operator should be equipped to observe and report effectively. If that requires specialized equipment," he handed Elena a case containing a precision rifle similar to the one she had been training with, along with a high-powered scope and several magazines of match-grade ammunition. Elena stared at the rifle case, understanding the significance of what Peterson was offering. This wasn't an official assignment. Williams had no idea that Elena would be armed with anything beyond her standard M16, but Peterson was giving her the opportunity to contribute to the fight using skills that no one else on the base fully understood.
"Thank you, Sergeant," Elena said, her voice thick with emotion.
"I won't let you down." Peterson's expression grew serious. "Rodriguez, listen to me carefully. Tonight, people are going to die. Good people, brave people, people with families waiting for them at home. If you have the ability to prevent that, you have an obligation to use it. Don't worry about chain of command or what people expect from you. Do what needs to be done." As darkness fell over the base, Elena positioned herself in her assigned location, but with the precision rifle hidden among her other equipment. She maintained radio contact with base operations while scanning the eastern approaches through the rifle's scope. The night vision attachment allowed her to see details in the darkness that would have been invisible to the naked eye. The attack began at 23:47 hours with rocket-propelled grenades launched from multiple positions in the surrounding mountains. Elena watched through her scope as muzzle flashes erupted from ridgelines that had been empty and peaceful just hours before. The Taliban had infiltrated close to the base perimeter without being detected, demonstrating a level of tactical sophistication that surprised everyone. "Contact east!" Multiple RPGs inbound. Elena radioed to base operations, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around her. Explosions rocked the base as grenades found their targets, and the night sky lit up with tracer rounds and burning fuel. Elena's squad immediately returned fire, but the enemy positions were well concealed and difficult to target in the darkness. Taliban fighters had positioned themselves among the rocks at ranges of 400 to 800 yards, distances where their AK-47 rifles were marginally effective, but where return fire from the defending forces was largely wasted ammunition. Through her scope, Elena could see what her squadmates could not. Enemy fighters were moving between positions, coordinating their attacks, and preparing for what appeared to be a ground assault. She watched a Taliban fighter set up what looked like a heavy machine gun at approximately 600 yards, a position that would allow devastating fire on her squad's defensive positions. Elena faced a choice that would define the rest of her life. She could continue in her assigned role as radio operator, calling in reports while watching her fellow soldiers face overwhelming firepower. Or she could trust in months of training and her own developing abilities to engage targets that no one else could effectively reach. "Base operations, this is Rodriguez," she radioed. "I have eyes on enemy machine gun position 600 yards northeast of my location, preparing to engage. Elena didn't wait for permission or acknowledgement. She settled into a prone firing position behind her sandbags, the precision rifle feeling natural and balanced in her hands. Through the scope, she could see the Taliban fighter adjusting his machine gun's position, preparing to unleash devastating fire on her squad. Elena controlled her breathing, just as Peterson had taught her during countless training sessions. She calculated range, wind speed, and target movement, making minute adjustments to her scope settings. The Taliban fighter paused in his preparations, presenting a clear shot for approximately 3 seconds. Elena fired. The bullet traveled for nearly 2 seconds before impact, and Elena watched through her scope as the enemy fighter dropped instantly. The machine gun position fell silent, eliminating a threat that could have killed half her squad in the first burst of sustained fire. "Target down," Elena reported calmly, already scanning for new threats. Enemy machine gun neutralized. Elena's second shot came 4 minutes later when she spotted Taliban fighters attempting to flank her squad's position, using a gully that would have brought them within grenade range undetected. A single precision shot at 450 yards eliminated the lead fighter and caused the flanking attempt to collapse as the remaining attackers sought cover. Word of Elena's shooting spread quickly through the radio network. Staff Sergeant Williams, who had been coordinating defensive fire from a position 50 yards away, called Elena directly. "Rodriguez, what the hell is going on over there? Operations is telling me you're engaging targets at long range." "Affirmative, Sergeant," Elena replied, her eyes still pressed to her scope. "I have clear sight lines and specialized equipment. I've neutralized 2 high-value targets that were threatening squad positions." Williams was quiet for a moment, processing information that contradicted everything he thought he knew about Elena's capabilities. "Continue engaging as targets present," he said finally. "Good shooting, Rodriguez." Over the next 2 hours, Elena fired 17 carefully aimed shots and scored 16 hits. Each shot eliminated a specific threat. Taliban fighters with RPGs, snipers targeting American positions, leaders coordinating attacks, or machine gunners preparing to unleash devastating firepower. Elena's position gave her a commanding view of the eastern approach, and her precision rifle allowed her to engage targets that were completely safe from other defenders' weapons. But Elena's most important shot came at 1:33 hours, when the Taliban launched their final assault on the base perimeter. Through her scope, Elena watched as approximately 20 fighters emerged from concealment and began advancing toward her squad's position. In the darkness and confusion, most of the defending soldiers couldn't clearly identify targets until the attackers were within 100 yards. Elena, however, could see the entire assault developing from 400 yards away. She identified the assault leader, a fighter carrying a radio and directing the movement of other attackers. Elena knew that eliminating the leader would likely disrupt the entire attack. But the shot would be challenging even by her developing standards. The target was moving quickly between cover positions, presenting only brief opportunities for engagement. Elena would have perhaps 2 seconds to acquire, aim, and fire before the fighter disappeared behind the next boulder. At 400 yards in darkness, with a moving target partially concealed by terrain, it was a shot that would challenge even experienced snipers. Elena controlled her breathing and tracked the target's movement pattern. She anticipated where the fighter would appear next and positioned her crosshairs accordingly. When the Taliban leader emerged from cover, Elena had already begun her trigger squeeze. The shot was perfect. Elena watched the assault leader fall, and within seconds, the coordinated attack began to dissolve. Without central direction, the Taliban fighters became confused and disorganized. Some continued advancing while others sought cover, and their coordinated assault became a collection of individual actions that Elena's squad could defeat in detail. Elena continued engaging targets as they presented themselves, each shot carefully aimed and devastatingly effective. By 2:15 hours, the Taliban assault had completely collapsed, with surviving fighters withdrawing to positions beyond Elena's effective range. The base remained under sporadic fire for another hour, but the main assault had been broken. Elena had fired a total of 23 rounds during the engagement and had scored 22 hits, a performance that would have been exceptional for any sniper and was nothing short of miraculous for a soldier who had failed basic marksmanship training just 18 months earlier. As dawn broke over the mountains surrounding forward operating base Shank, Elena found herself surrounded by soldiers who looked at her with expressions ranging from amazement to disbelief. Staff Sergeant Williams approached her position, shaking his head slowly. "Rodriguez," he said, his voice carrying a mixture of respect and confusion. "I owe you an apology. Actually, I owe you more than that. Your shooting last night saved lives. Probably saved all our lives. Private Jackson, Elena's former tormentor, appeared at William's shoulder with an expression of stunned respect. "Miss Target," he said, then caught himself. "I mean, Elena. I've never seen anything like that. You were hitting targets I couldn't even see with my scope." Elena felt overwhelmed by the praise and attention, but also by a deep sense of satisfaction that she had never experienced before. For the first time in her military career, she had not just contributed to a mission, she had been the deciding factor in its success. All those months of failure and doubt had led to this moment when her unique combination of skills had made the difference between life and death for her fellow soldiers. Sergeant First Class Peterson found Elena later that morning as she cleaned her rifle and reflected on the night's events. "Outstanding work last night, Rodriguez," he said simply. "You performed like a veteran sniper with 10 years of experience." "Thank you, Sergeant," Elena replied. "I couldn't have done it without your training." Peterson studied Elena thoughtfully. "I've been talking with Colonel Martinez about your performance. There's going to be an investigation, of course. Any time someone fires that many rounds in combat, there are questions to answer. But based on what I saw last night and what other soldiers are reporting, you're going to be recommended for specialized sniper training." Elena felt her heart skip a beat. Formal sniper training was one of the most demanding and prestigious assignments in the military, reserved for soldiers who demonstrated exceptional marksmanship and tactical abilities. For someone who had struggled through basic training, it seemed impossible. "Are you serious, Sergeant?" Elena asked, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Dead serious," Peterson replied. "You have a natural talent that can't be taught, and you've proven you can perform under the most extreme pressure. The Army needs snipers who can make the shots that matter when everything is on the line. Last night, you proved you're that kind of soldier." The formal investigation into Elena's actions during the Taliban assault took 2 weeks. Military investigators interviewed every soldier who had witnessed her shooting, examined the precision rifle she had used, and analyzed the tactical impact of her actions on the battle's outcome. The conclusion was unanimous. Elena Rodriguez had single-handedly prevented the base from being overrun, saving dozens of American lives through exceptional marksmanship. Colonel Martinez called Elena to his office for a personal meeting after the investigation concluded. Elena had never been in the base commander's office before, and she felt nervous as she stood at attention before his desk. "At ease, Rodriguez," Colonel Martinez said, gesturing for Elena to sit down. "I've been in the Army for 25 years, and I've seen a lot of soldiers in combat. What you did 2 weeks ago was remarkable. Not just the shooting, though that was extraordinary, but the initiative you showed, the tactical awareness, and the courage to take action when it mattered most." Elena felt overwhelmed by the praise from such a senior officer. "Thank you, sir. I was just doing my job." Colonel Martinez smiled. "No, Rodriguez, you were doing much more than your job. You were being the kind of soldier that others can count on when everything goes wrong. That's not something that can be taught in any training program." The colonel handed Elena a folder containing official orders. "Effective immediately, you're being reassigned to specialized sniper training at Fort Benning. After that, you'll be assigned to a dedicated sniper unit where your skills can be used most effectively. This is an exceptional opportunity, and I believe you have the potential to excel in ways that will surprise everyone, including yourself." Elena stared at the orders, hardly able to believe that the same Fort Benning where she had struggled through basic training would now be the site of her advanced military education. The transformation from failed recruit to specialized sniper seemed too dramatic to be real. "Sir," Elena said carefully, "what about my current unit? Staff Sergeant Williams and my squad?" Colonel Martinez's expression grew more serious. "Your squad will miss your contributions, but they understand that you have abilities that can serve the broader mission more effectively in a specialized role. Staff Sergeant Williams specifically requested that I tell you he's proud of how far you've come and confident that you'll continue to exceed expectations." Elena's remaining time at Forward Operating Base Shank was surreal. The same soldiers who had mocked her failures during training now sought her advice on shooting techniques and tactical observation. Private Jackson, her former tormentor, approached her the day before her departure with genuine humility. "Elena," he said, using her first name with obvious respect, "I owe you an apology. Actually, I owe you a lot more than that. I was wrong about you, and I was cruel when I should have been supportive. You saved our lives, and you did it after months of people like me telling you that you didn't belong here." Elena felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness at Jackson's words. "We all make mistakes," she said simply. "What matters is that we learn from them and try to be better." Elena's departure from Afghanistan came sooner than expected. Military transport was arranged within a week of her reassignment orders, and she found herself on a cargo plane heading back to the United States with a mixture of relief and anticipation. She was returning home not as a failed soldier who had barely survived deployment, but as a proven warrior who had demonstrated exceptional abilities under the most demanding conditions. The sniper training at Fort Benning was unlike anything Elena had experienced during her initial military education. Where basic training had emphasized conformity and following orders precisely, sniper training celebrated individual initiative and creative problem-solving. Elena thrived in an environment that valued her unique combination of patience, observational skills, and precision shooting abilities. Her instructors were amazed by Elena's rapid progress and natural aptitude for advanced marksmanship techniques. Chief Warrant Officer Thompson, the senior sniper instructor, told Elena during her final evaluation that she had demonstrated the fastest skill development he had seen in 15 years of training snipers. "Rodriguez, you have a gift," Thompson said as Elena prepared to graduate from the program. "But more importantly, you have the character and judgment to use that gift responsibly. The shots you take as a sniper aren't just about hitting targets. They're about making the right decision at the right moment to protect your fellow soldiers." Elena's new assignment was to the 3rd Infantry Division, where she would serve as part of a specialized sniper team supporting combat operations around the world. Her official military occupational specialty was now 11B-2S Infantry Sniper, a designation that carried tremendous responsibility and respect within the military community. But Elena's most meaningful recognition came in a letter from her mother, who had learned about Elena's combat heroics through official military channels. The letter arrived just before Elena's graduation from sniper school, and she read it alone in her barracks room with tears streaming down her face. "Mija," her mother wrote, "I always knew you had strength inside you, even when you couldn't see it yourself. You have become the kind of woman I always hoped you would be. Someone who stands up when others need protection. Someone who finds a way to succeed no matter how many times you fall down. Your father would be proud, and I am proud beyond words." Elena folded the letter carefully and placed it in her uniform pocket next to her heart. She thought about the long journey from the dusty streets of Marfa, Texas, to the elite ranks of military snipers. Every failure, every moment of doubt, every cruel joke from fellow soldiers had been part of a path that led to her discovering abilities she never knew she possessed. Elena Rodriguez had entered the military as a young woman, with no clear direction and limited confidence in her abilities. She had struggled through training, failed at most conventional military skills, and been dismissed by almost everyone as the weak link who would never amount to anything significant. But in the mountains of Afghanistan, when her fellow soldiers faced overwhelming odds and certain death, Elena had found her true calling. The same careful observation skills that had made her seem slow and indecisive during training became her greatest asset when identifying enemy positions. The patience and methodical approach that had frustrated drill sergeants became essential qualities for precision shooting under pressure. Most importantly, Elena had learned that strength comes in many forms, and that the most valuable contributions often come from the people others least expect to succeed. She had transformed from the soldier everyone expected to fail into the guardian who brought them all home alive. Years later, Elena would serve multiple deployments as a sniper, accumulating a record of successful missions and confirmed eliminations that would make her a legend within the special operations community. She would train new snipers, sharing the lessons she had learned about finding strength in unexpected places and never giving up on developing your unique abilities. But Elena never forgot the night at Forward Operating Base Shank when everything changed. She never forgot the feeling of watching through her scope as Taliban fighters prepared to overrun her squad, knowing that she alone had the skills and position necessary to prevent a massacre. She never forgot the weight of responsibility that came with each shot, or the satisfaction of proving that even the most unlikely soldier could become exactly what their unit needed when the stakes were highest. Elena Rodriguez had failed every drill during training, struggled through months of deployment, and been dismissed by almost everyone as a soldier who didn't belong in combat. But when her fellow soldiers needed a guardian angel hidden in the darkness with a precision rifle, Elena was exactly where she needed to be, with exactly the skills necessary to save them all. The young woman from Marfa, Texas, who couldn't hit targets at close range, had become the sniper who never missed when it mattered most.